Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking our first-person character controller and we are going to be making them a third-person character controller. So this is going to involve a few sort of bits and pieces and steps there for it, and we're going to focus on just getting the sort of initial core functionality going. There's obviously quite a lot of bits there that we could be adding in future and that we will add in future, but for now we want to focus on just getting some of the core bits up and running. So let's dive on in. And one of the starting points we kind of need to do is, because I want our player character motor to easily be able to switch between first and third person. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to set up so that we have a mode option in the player character motor where we can actually say, is this a first or third person character motor? So what we're going to do is we will have here public enum e mode. And I might call that camera mode so it's clear what it's referring to. And then we're going to have first person. Now, third person actually has a couple of different ways of how we can work with it. You can have a third person one where as the camera rotates, the character rotates, or you can have one where the camera rotates independently. So what I'm going to do to start off with is we will do one that is a one where the camera rotates the character as well. And then at a later point, we can take a look at adding in the other setup. It is a bit more complex, which is why we're just going to focus on having the character rotate to begin with. So I'll have third person, and we'll say camera rotates avatar. So that's good. Then we need to actually be setting that. So I'm going to, under the player here, we'll have a serialize field, and we'll have a E camera mode, which will default to first person. Then I'm going to set up sections here for first person and for third person. Now I'm intentionally going to break the code a little bit here, and that's fine. That's an intentional thing of what I'm trying to do with this. So I'm going to have, I'll need a transform here for third person camera transform. This will become first person camera transform. And that way I can set up a little helper that what it will do is based upon the camera mode will give me the appropriate transform. So transform, camera transform is going to be, well, if camera mode is first person, then it's the first person transform. Otherwise, it's the third person one. So, okay, we've got a transform there that'll make that a little bit easier for working with. I likely am also going to need to adjust things like specific settings on that camera. So I'm actually going to bring in Cinemachine so that I can have, and while for first person we won't really be doing anything much with this, useful to be able to support it. So I'll have Cinemachine virtual camera, and this will be the first person camera. And then, not surprisingly, we'll also have a third person one. And the reason I'm setting it up like this with the different variables is we could have one sort of Uber character motor that does all of these things. So it's handy to have separate options there for it. So we'll have this, I'll call that linked camera. And we do very similar setup to what we already had here with the camera mode. That's first person. So a lot of our code won't need to care about whether it is first or third person, and that's good. So, okay, there's a couple of other settings we're going to need here. With a third person camera, we need to pull that back from the character. So we're kind of putting that camera on a boom. So what I would actually do then is we'll have a float, and we want to be able to control the length of that. So camera boom length. And let's maybe default that to 15. We want to be able to control the height range that it can go as well, so that they can't, sort of flip it to a level where it's going to be a problem. So it could have camera boom min height, which I might default to 2. Then we're also going to need a max height, which I might make 15, and a default height, which I might make 5. So this will give us a few things that we need for being able to position that camera boom, which is going to be where that transform is located. So that's good. We've got those bits up and running. So let's look at other areas we need to sort of set up then, because we need to initially position the actual sort of camera. And that's going to be an important thing of getting the camera positioned in the right spot. So we're going to look through basically for anything that we might have broken with those camera changes, which quite likely there will be things that break. And if we go back to Unity, odds are we will see some compile errors from those name changes. Kind of lucky, and we don't. We must have matched the names perfectly. But if we look through, anything where it's working with the camera likely needs changes. So here in Start, well, this is for a first-person camera. So because we might want to allow to switch cameras while we're actually running, I'm going to set up a configure camera for mode function, which what it's going to do is check if the camera mode is first person. Then we'll do this. So we can call this configure for camera mode. Oh, sorry, configure camera for mode. Just fix that up after we... There we go. So first person unchanged. Otherwise, well, if the camera mode, kind of for any third person ones, even if we add in additional ones, it'll likely be quite similar. So we need to set that local position. Now, we don't want it to be too far back, but it's actually pretty easy of how we configure this, because we can say, and I could actually compose it like this, vector3 up times by the default height. So we've taken the camera, we've lifted it up, then we subtract vector3 dot back, or sorry, dot forward, because I don't think we have a backward, multiplied by the camera boom length. And I'll put this on a separate line, just so it's easier to read. So what this will do is it will move the camera up and back, which is perfect. So that's what we want. We can also set our actual camera. So this is using that. We can actually go linked camera transform. Or is it camera transform? I think it's camera transform I called it. Just in case we actually had the Cinemachine camera not perfectly attached on the boom, it could be a child object, to make sure we're adjusting the correct thing. So then with the linked camera, I want to tell it to be looking at our transform. Whereas with this one, the linked camera look at would be null. We're not wanting it to be looking at anything particular. So that will configure the camera the way we need, which is good. So then there's likely going to be some other bits where we need to update. So we've got this update camera. So update camera, if we take a look, these early chunks here, those should happen for both first and third person ones. The rest of this is specific to the camera type. So here I'm going to say if camera mode is first person, then I'm going to create a new function that I'll call update camera first person. Otherwise, we do update camera third person. Then this one here, and we'll match so that we've got the same setup. So protected void. This is our updating of the first person camera. And then we'll do a similar thing where we set up our third person one. So they protected void, like that. Now we want to pass through. We'll see that it's getting an error because it needs these sensitivities. So I have H sensitivity and float V sensitivity. So we'll make sure both of these have that passed in, and that then here we pass those through. So it just means we can keep first person camera logic in one clear section, third person in another clear section. Just avoids it getting messy and confusing with it. So, okay, that's pretty good. This we're going to update, so we're changing camera transform just so we're being consistent. Also has the nice side benefit of it makes these lines a little bit shorter, which shorter lines always good. Makes it a lot clearer of what's happening. So that's good. So if we think about how the third person camera works, we have vertical input and we have horizontal input. And it's actually quite straightforward how we want these to work. If we look at the rotation input, so that'll be the horizontal input that we get. So what we already can use is what we've got here in terms of calculating this yaw delta. That's actually very viable for us to keep. And we'll also bring the pitch one over. We'll interpret them differently. So the camera yaw delta actually is unchanged. That should be exactly the same as what we've already got. But this is actually the camera height delta, is actually how we should look at that. So we've got our camera yaw delta and our camera height delta. Well, the yaw, to apply that, what I want to be able to do is, and I'm going to check the mode here, because we could have we could be using the mode where the camera is independent. So I want to set up so that it's easy for in future when I want to add that it is a very straightforward area for changing it. So for this, for rotating it, well, we would actually do pretty similar to what we do for our local rotation here. Actually bring that exact one across. So yaw is largely unchanged. Nothing needs to be different about it. Our position, however, that we do need to work with a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is, and I will do this above here, is I'm going to get local camera pos is my camera transform local position. So we've got the local position. Then I want to update that based upon that height delta, but I want to constrain it. So my local camera pos.y would be a mathf clamp of local camera pulse.y plus that height delta. And then we have our min height and our max height. So we've clamped the height between the valid ranges. Then I can say camera transform local position is equal to that updated one. And that should pretty much be it in terms of having the camera be able to function the way we need. We've now got to set up a bunch of data. And if we take a look at the player, one of the things they've got is this motor config, which that has things like horizontal and vertical sensitivities, which may need to be different between first and third person. So I'm actually going to rename this one to first person. I'm going to duplicate it like that and create one that I call third person. The prefab here, if we go to that prefab, this is actually a first person player. So I'm going to take this and unpack the prefab because we're creating a new one. So I unpack it completely. This becomes third person player. We switch the config here to the third person one, and the camera mode gets switched to third person. We can link up our different settings here. So we can link up the player camera. So that's good. And then I can actually prefab that. Now, first person player one is going to need a little bit of an update because we need to link over the camera. So that's good. So we now have a third person player that has the different config, and that setup looks pretty good. We need to move this camera back though. So what I'm going to do is position it roughly where it would initially be set. So 5 minus 15. Now we can't tell what we're looking at, and we will end up adding in a mesh. But firstly, what I'm going to do just so we can actually see it is I'm going to put in, and I'll put in a cube that I will increase the height of, and we'll turn off collision on. This cube is purely so we can visualize this. Then, in terms of the camera, with aim, we'll make sure it's doing a hard look at. That should work quite nicely. So let's test that out. All going well, I should be able to pan my camera around. I can see the character rotates. I can move. I can jump. Everything is working. Now we've obviously we've picked up stuff like our med kit and that. So we've got things that we can interact with. We would need to obviously change our pickup scanning point, so we can see that that's something that will need to be updated in future. But we have the third person camera working. We have height limits, so that's good. Now it's time to get this so it has actually got a mesh. So in terms of access for things like meshes, you might already have a pre-built character that you want to use the mesh for. That's absolutely an option there. What I'll show you is how you can get a basic character in using a setup from Mixamo. So Mixamo is something where you can get free character models and animations. Now, what I would generally use is if you search for something like locomotion, you can get things like a locomotion pack. That will have a whole bunch of animations in it and provide you a decent standard set of animations. You can get ones that are sort of more tailored to how we expect characters of particular genders to be running. There's a whole range of different ones available here, as well as a lot of different characters. So you've got huge range of different characters here that you can make use of. When you want to grab one, so what you can do is say there's a character that you want and you want a particular set of animations. You can select that character, then go to animations, and if I do something where I go and search for, say, locomotion, and say I pick this locomotion pack, I'll be able to see the animations play here, and then I can go download. Now, option-wise for downloading, there is actually a specific FBX for Unity option. So I recommend selecting that. The other settings I normally would use as just the default. So keep all of the rest of the settings to default and you can download that. That will give you a zip file, which that zip file, when you unzip it, looks like this. You have your character mesh, and then you have all of these named animations. So I'm going to bring that into the project. So I'm going to have here character, and then I will bring in all of these. Now there is a bit of a process we have to go through for them being able to use these in game. So when I select the character first, so I'm going to drag them into here and rename that as mesh. And we'll be able to see them over here. So, okay, we've got that character there. We've got that mesh. Now, if I go to the model here, there's nothing I need to change at this stage. But under rig, I want to change the animation type to humanoid. The avatar, it can create it from this model because I'm doing this with the base character one. Then I can go apply. So that will now have an avatar for this setup. So what I can then do, and I should see no difference for dragging that in. It's already got the avatar, so it's updated the thing. But what I then do is these other ones here, these become humanoid. The avatar, I copy it from this one that already has been set up, and I go apply. The other thing you'll likely need to do is if you go to animation, the name for all of these animations which will appear here will tend to be mixamo.com. So I actually always go in and rename them, and I also mark them for ones where it's appropriate as looping. So I'm going to update the idle. I'm going to update our left strafe. So same sort of thing, humanoid, copy from other avatar, and apply. Then under the animation, we set up the name, left strafe, and it loops in time. We can go apply. So we just do this with each of the ones that we're needing to use. So it takes a little bit of time to get it set up. But it's something where it's a necessary step we have to actually do. So left strafe walking, and we loop, and we apply. I'm going to leave out the turns and jumps. The jump animation from this pack doesn't really quite work nicely in that I actually kind of want more of it's split between the jumping and the landing, and that's something where it's free animations, so there is always going to usually be some compromise with it. So for now there won't be a jump animation, but that is something that I will try and track down some better animations in future, but for now, these will show you the setup process we go through. So just for each individual one, humanoid now, as I said, this does take a little bit to get it set up, but we'll then very soon have our character being able to run around with animations, which is very cool. So right strafe walking, like that. And so sometimes it doesn't update the name. So we do want to just make sure that that's properly set. So those are looking good. Then we have 2 more ones to update. Then we'll be able to actually create the controller for this. So this one is running. And then the final one of walking. There we go. So now what we do, because we've got the mesh and we've got the animations, so what I'm going to set up here is mesh and animations. Now generally, if your characters are all on similarly structured skeletons, they don't actually need separate animations. You can use those animations for multiple characters, which can be really handy. So I could bring in other characters here and I wouldn't need to bring in a separate set of animations for them, which is great. So what I can do is I can create an animator controller. So anim controller, humanoid. And I'll link that up here. And then we're going to look at setting this up. So what we want to do is, and there's something called a blend tree that makes this really easy. We want to be able to pass into this saying, I'm going forwards, I'm going right, here's my speed, for example, and it can use that to determine what animations to actually play. So what I'm going to do is create one here that is forward speed, and another one that is sideways speed. And then I create here a blend tree. And if I go to this blend tree, I select it, and I'm going to use a freeform directional one. And you'll see it lets me pick 2 parameters here. So I'm going to change that to sideways. And we've got our little one down here, which is handy. So now I can add in, and I just add in a bunch of, to start off with, what's called motion fields. And what these are is for each input, you map that to a particular animation. So, and you'll see it lays them out here in a grid. So I'm going to grab first running, which is movement forwards. So we set that to 1. Then I'm going to grab walking. So running is 1 in Y. Walking will be 0.5 in Y. Then I'm going to grab left strafe and left strafe walking. So left strafe will be -1 and 0, whereas left strafe walking will be -0.5 and 0. Then I'm going to grab right strafe walking and right strafe, and these become 0.5. So we are laying them out on the individual axes. Then I have walking and running again, but these ones, so this is for -0.5, and I will play it at a speed of -1, should do the trick. So it'll play those backwards. And then finally, idle for at 0. Then I can test this. So you can see how I've got my inputs here for sideways and everything. So if I hit play, and then I bring forwards up, I can see the character switches to running. Going backwards, and I could test, okay, well, would mirroring work better? So I could try mirrored for that and see and that doesn't really look nice. So we'd switch back to -1 for these. So it makes it really easy for us to test. And you can actually just drag around in here and see, okay, well, if I'm heading to the right, what does it look like? What does it look like if I'm running like this? You can test all of the different movements really easily. And we just need to pass through forward speed and sideways speed, which I'll just rename that. I think will be better. So let's set that up so we've got that being fed through. So the other thing I want to do is I actually don't want it to apply root motion because the animations might have root motion in them, so where the actual mesh moves, and I want to remove that. So it's just playing it on the spot essentially. Does mean you need to match your speeds to the animation speed, but it does mean that you get a much, you don't have issues with the animation moving the character. So I need to pass through here, protected, animator, anim controller. And then what I do, and I'm going to do this down in our, we don't have an update currently. So I'm going to set up for update. So the anim controller, I want to be able to go anim controller, set float, forward speed, and also do the same thing with sideways speed. But that means I need to calculate those values. So that's actually pretty easy. My forwards speed, well, I can access the rigid body, so I can go state, linked rigid body, velocity, and if I go a vector3 ... with that and my transform forward, that's going to give me the forward speed, and I can divide that by my max possible speed, which is my run speed. The sideways speed is going to be the same, but we use transform.right. So we've got that, and we've got our sideways speed. So we should have our character actually playing animations as they move around now. And if we have this up while it's selected, we'll actually see what's happening in the blend tree there as well, which can be really handy for debugging things. So I'll just link up the animator, and then I'm going to run this. So we should see it go into its idle pose, which they have. And then as I move around, it's playing the animations. Now we would need to adjust the speed so it syncs up, but they're playing it. We go to sprint. So that's excellent. We have our third person character motor working. Bring it up so we can see it in a little bit larger detail. And we could be using any mesh with this. As I said, with jumping, it's not going to apply a jump animation. Currently, the jump animation, you kind of want that broken up into sort of a launch, a midair, and a land. So this pack doesn't have those split up, so I'm not actually going to play the jump animation because I don't think it looks particularly good. But we've got our controller working. Now, there's obviously going to be areas where we need to adjust things like our pickup, where we need to probably adjust things for gravity in different scenarios, but we've got our core setup up and running. So we'll be adding in further bits where we will be making it work with different third-person modes. We'll be adding in gravity support, sorting out the stuff like pickups and that. But for now, this gives you a setup of how you can add in a third-person controller, and also how you can rig up the animation setup for it. And that's a really important thing. Those blend trees are really easy to set up, and they make it very, very easy then for playing the animations for your character. So dive on in and experiment with it and see the kinds of things you can add to it. Thanks folks, hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe, it really helps out, it's really appreciated. If you're looking for the code for the project, that code is available up on GitHub, and there's a link to that in the description below. If you have any questions, chuck in a comment. And if you are looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description below. But until next time,